If you are as old as me, and yeah, that's pretty old, you probably remember the golden age of sitcom television, when turning on the TV wasn't the media equivalent of eating the same Chinese takeaway every evening after work. Now, if you are that old, you might also remember that back in the early 2000s, essentially every half-successful movie or TV show tried to cash in on the rapidly growing gaming industry by producing piles of dung, packaging them in CD-ROM boxes and stamping a well-known brand name on the cover. Sure, there were exceptions to the rule, but most of these so-called video game adaptations looked something like this. The Simpsons naturally couldn't escape that trend. Over the years, the franchise spawned dozens of video game cash grabs, some admittedly more entertaining than others. Throughout the 90s, we got Simpsons games in just about every genre imaginable, from platformers and racing games all the way to horror. Then 2001 arrived, and the gaming landscape changed forever. Suddenly, everyone wanted to make the next big open-world game, and publisher Vivendi Universal Games was paying close attention. They approached the Canadian studio Radical Entertainment, a developer that already had some experience ripping off successful games and mutating them into the Simpsons universe. After all, they had just been sued by Sega over how closely their previous game, The Simpsons Road Rage, resembled Crazy Taxi. Vivendi asked Radical a simple question.
Have you ever walked out of a mall into a huge parking area and realized you'd forgotten where you parked your car?
No, not that one. Can you make us GTA 3, but in yellow? And Radical basically went, "Hold my beer." And so, the door opens to a project that would go on to sell millions of copies, become a legend among 90s and 2000s kids, and quite possibly become the greatest Simpsons game ever made. Replaying the game today in 2026 wasn't my first encounter with it. As a kid, I played the PC version of The Simpsons Hit and Run when it launched in 2003. You know, in a completely legal way, like any Central European kid would.
If you do it, you will face the consequences.
But I never finished it. Coming back to it today, I realized that I actually never made it past the first chapter. I remember having pretty mixed feelings about the game back then. I was absolutely blown away by the fact that I could freely move around fully 3D Springfield. That alone felt magical to me. But somewhere along the way, the game lost me because of what I considered to be its brutal difficulty and, at least from my perspective back then, its repetitive mission design. It didn't help that I barely understood English at that time, so most of the jokes, references and Easter eggs flew straight over my head.
That's what you get for expecting me to do the job for which I am paid. Please don't sue!
What I saw instead was simply a less engaging GTA clone, and since I wasn't a huge GTA fan to begin with, I dropped it pretty quickly. So now I'm sitting here, the credits have just rolled on The Simpsons Hit and Run, and I'm finally ready to answer one question. Was my 13-year-old self actually right? Well, it's complicated. The game opens with a swarm of wasps spying on Homer while he's sitting on the legendary couch. They quickly discover that spying on a 200-pound chunk of a man isn't exactly a great idea. Much like I quickly discovered that the plot is a completely insane, whacked-out story, which probably won't come as much of a surprise if you've ever watched an episode of The Simpsons. Then I finally get control of Homer on the lawn outside the iconic family house, and the atmosphere is exactly as I remember it from more than 20 years ago. It's honestly hard to believe that I'm not inside an actual Simpsons episode. The graphics are beautiful actually, or at least charming. And I'm not entirely sure how much of that comes from the game's timeless comic book art style and how much credit belongs to the community graphics mode I'm using. If you plan on playing the PC version today, and getting hold of it isn't exactly rocket science if you know where to look, and if you don't, well, just Google exists. I strongly recommend using the community fix called Lucas Simpsons Hit and Run Launcher. Besides making the game look and run much better on modern systems, it also lets you tweak quite a few gameplay settings. Yeah, it's basically a trainer.
That's right, we're gonna cheat.
The game consists of 7 story chapters. In each one you play as a different member of the Simpsons family, with one chapter dedicated to the Quickie Mart owner Apu. You begin with Homer before cycling through the entire family at least once. Each character has their own little agenda. Homer is investigating the mysterious surveillance wasps, Bart is desperately trying to get his hands on a new violent video game, while helping Professor Frink build a giant dino mech in the process, and Lisa is searching for her brother, completely unaware that he was abducted by aliens at the end of the previous chapter. What initially feels like a bunch of unrelated TV episodes slowly grows into one big conspiracy, involving alien abductions, zombies, an intergalactic reality show, and a whole lot of driving. Yeah, by the time you reach the final chapter, the game has completely embraced the madness. It basically turns into one giant Treehouse of Horror episode. Now, this being 2003, don't expect separate progression systems, skill trees or unique abilities for each character. Everyone controls exactly the same, and they all share the same pool of money, which occasionally creates some nonsensical situations, like when Bart is forced to buy one of Homer's cars using the money Homer earned in the previous chapter, only for that car to immediately become available to everyone anyway. But let's just say that whatever the aliens are putting into Buzz Cola to control Springfield's population has also completely changed the way local economy works. Even though the gameplay itself barely changes from character to character, switching between them still helps keep things reasonably fresh. Each one has their own personality, their own jokes and even their own musical theme, because while Hit and Run doesn't have progression systems, what it does have is atmosphere, buckets of it. The very first chapter, where I stepped into Evergreen Terrace as Homer for the first time in over 20 years, put a nostalgic grin on my face from ear to ear. A grin I honestly couldn't wipe off for the rest of the game.
Hey, Homer. You look like you're having one of your trademark adventures.
Danger! Mr. Burns! Mini cameras! Black vans!
The original voice cast returned for the project, so you genuinely feel like you're part of a Simpsons episode, almost like another member of the family. The story and dialogue weren't actually written by Matt Groening himself, but they were heavily supervised by him, and every major script revision had to be approved by the show's producers throughout development. So even though the creator himself didn't write the dialogue, it still feels deeply rooted in the Simpsons universe. And sure, if you're being honest, the plot itself isn't exactly Shakespeare. But the jokes land, the dialogue is consistently funny, and in my opinion, it feels fresher than anything the show has produced in years. While cruising around Springfield and listening to your characters throw out one-liners that constantly break the fourth wall in ways that aren't exactly subtle but are still surprisingly clever,
It's just between me and you, random object.
another thing immediately pulled me in: the soundtrack. It's absolutely fantastic. Most of the music was written specifically for the game, with only a few exceptions like the iconic Simpsons theme. But just like the writing, every single track perfectly captures the feeling of the TV show. Had I not known that these songs were composed for the game, I would have happily believed they'd been lifted straight from the series. I caught myself nodding along to the jazzy, energetic soundtrack while collecting escaped monkeys or smashing an alien limousine far more often than I like to admit. But the greatest thing about the game, the biggest reason I wanted to play it so badly as a kid, failed miserably and eventually came back 23 years later, isn't Homer. No! It's the other protagonist. It's Springfield. The game world isn't a true open world in the modern sense. Instead, it's divided into 3 separate maps that aren't connected to one another. And honestly, even calling them open is stretching the definition a bunch. Each chapter takes place in a different part of town. Although there are 7 chapters and only 3 districts that begin repeating after chapter 3, the different times of day do a surprisingly good job of keeping each revisit feeling fresh. Unlike certain other aspects of the game, but we'll get to those in a minute. The 3 areas you'll explore are the suburbs, downtown Springfield, and the sunset-soaked coastal district that feels like somebody played Vice City one too many times. Technically, you're free to explore. Technically. In reality, you mostly drive forward or backwards. Each district is basically one large racing circuit with a main road and a handful of shortcuts branching off it. But despite that, Springfield is an absolute joy to drive through. It's packed with pedestrians, traffic, and iconic locations like Moe's Tavern, the Quickie Mart, and the Springfield nuclear power plant. For any Simpsons fan, simply existing in this version of Springfield is a treat. In fact, it's such a wonderfully realized world that it's a real shame the mission design rarely lets you slow down and properly appreciate it. Instead, you'll usually blast past these landmarks faster than Homer spotting a donut. Which brings us to the elephant in the room, the gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, 2 things bothered me as a kid: the difficulty and the game's repetitiveness. Looking at it now with 2 more decades of gaming experience under my belt, I had to revise my opinion on at least one of those. To me, The Simpsons Hit and Run is a game of 2 acts. The first act, chapters 1 to 4, treats you like a grandma waiting after school with a fresh plate of cookies. The game is kind to you, it eases you in, the mission timers are surprisingly generous, and I managed to finish most of the missions on my first try. Then, chapter 5 arrives. Your older brother comes home, eats all the cookies, beats the living shit out of you, and leaves you unconscious on the front lawn. I mean, who didn't have a brother like that? Yeah. The difficulty spike from chapter 5 onwards is absolutely insane. And about 99% of it comes from one thing. Time limits. You see, nowadays, game developers have realized that time limits are pure evil and have replaced them with much more wholesome things, like microtransactions and social political agendas. But back in the early 2000s, timers were a thing, and believe me, they are the thing in the Simpsons hit and run. Like, the only thing. Every mission, literally every single mission has some sort of time limit. Sometimes it's technically a race against another car, which is just a time limit wearing a fake mustache and glasses, but it's still a time limit. And by the end of the game, those timers become completely batshit insane. You'll need to know every shortcut, every alleyway and every tiny optimization just to stand a chance of finishing some of the later missions. Now combine those brutal time limits with repetitive mission design and you've got yourself one hell of a toxic relationship. But honestly, the reason isn't that difficult to understand to me. It's one thing to ask a studio to make GTA with The Simpsons, it's a completely different thing to actually make that work within The Simpsons universe. Sure, the TV show isn't exactly afraid of cartoon violence, and according to people who worked on the game, Matt Groening himself apparently had a great time kicking pedestrians all around Springfield during development, but it's still pretty hard to imagine Lisa Simpson driving through town with a bazooka blowing school buses into orbit. So the developers toned the violence down. It's talked about, it's joked about, but it's almost never actually there. Even stealing a car is handled in the most peaceful way imaginable. The person whose car you're stealing simply gives you a lift, which leaves the developers with one primary gameplay mechanic: driving against the clock. Over and over and over again. Don't get me wrong, The Simpsons Hit and Run isn't a particularly long game, but even then there are basically 5 mission types. Collect items falling off another vehicle, race another vehicle, escape another vehicle, or destroy another vehicle using your own. That's about it. There are maybe 3 platforming missions scattered throughout the entire game, and honestly, they are the worst. I'm actually grateful the developers decided to focus almost entirely on driving, because repetitive as it becomes, it at least works. When I was forced to platform my way through the power plant with Homer during the second mission of the game, I genuinely thought, well, that's it.
No. Wait.
I wasn't willing to put up with that shit for another minute. The camera barely functioned. The controls felt like trying to perform heart surgery with a pair of pliers. And I was so done. Then a miracle happened. I did it. And it only came back maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the rest of the game. So the developers were apparently very aware of their shortcomings and wisely decided not to shove them in our faces any more than necessary. Still, even though the driving is enjoyable, I really wish the game had slowed down every now and then. Let me investigate something on foot. Let me actually follow a suspect instead of another glowing trail of floating objects. Let me do anything that isn't another race against the clock. In the final stretch of the game, you're asked to carry a barrel of nuclear waste from the power plant to a UFO on the opposite side of town, under an absurdly strict time limit. Not once, not twice, not 3 times. 4 fucking times. And while carrying the barrel, you're not allowed to hit anything, because every collision makes you drop it and forces you to drive back to the plant and pick it up again. It's the exact same mission, copied and pasted 3 times after you've already completed dozens of missions that follow the exact same formula. Honestly, it almost feels like the developers were making a meta joke at the player's expense. At that point, I caved.
You're a piece of shit.
I used the power of the community launcher, disabled the time limits and never looked back. My sanity was simply more important to me than my ego. According to the developers, there were a number of other ideas planned for the game that simply never made it to the final release because of the memory limitations of the hardware at that time. Whether that's actually true or not, I don't know, but I'd genuinely love to know what those ideas might have been. Because to me, The Simpsons Hit and Run feels like a game that got stuck halfway through becoming something even greater. It's a game whose form towers over its content. The city is beautiful, it brings back memories, it breathes nostalgia. It had me grinning like an idiot from beginning to end. The dialogue is sharp and genuinely funny, and the soundtrack perfectly captures the feeling of the early 2000s sitcom television. The gameplay itself isn't bad, not at all, but the missions desperately lack variety. Considering the whole game is only a few hours long, it's never enough to completely ruin the experience. It's just enough to constantly pull me out of everything else the game does so brilliantly. Which is a shame, because the rest of it is genuinely magical. I'd absolutely love to see this game return one day. Maybe not as a full remake, honestly I don't think it needs one. Just give us a proper remaster for modern systems, polish the visuals a little, smooth out those blocky character models, throw in a handful of new mission types, and you've already got my money. So, was my 13-year-old self right? Well, kind of. He was right that the gameplay becomes repetitive. He was right that the difficulty goes completely off the rails. But he completely missed everything that actually made this game special. Because 23 years later, The Simpsons Hit and Run is still a masterpiece. A flawed one, but a masterpiece nonetheless. And that's my message to my 13-year-old self. Now you tell me, what are your memories of The Simpsons Hit and Run? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next one.